great food.
That's right.
I was asked to present about writing empirical papers. That's pretty much what I do is first-hand research. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the outline for writing a paper is, because it really is just a formula. Just memorize the formula, learn it. You'll learn it as you're reading articles. Be sure and pay a lot of attention to the structure of it, how it's done, and then take note, of course, today about what you need to do to get published. And I think you probably gathered through all your sessions this morning, if not before, that your job is not just teaching. That's great if you're a wonderful teacher, we hope that you are, but your job in higher ed, if you want to be in a college setting, university setting, you need to be contributing to the body of knowledge. That's what we do. That's what we do different from community colleges or even high schools. We don't just teach. We learn from gather research. And so that's a large part of what your job is. Not only for the benefits of publishing and being mobile to find a great job, but also to contribute to the body of knowledge. We're going to go through an example, and then I have some tips I'd like to share with you. So first, as you see this paper outline, it's basically the introduction. You do a lit review and theory, methodology, where'd it go? Results and conclusions and discussions. That's the basic framework for your paper. Now to go into a little bit more detail on each section. First of all is get attention. You got to get your reviewers, your audience's attention. State what's going on, what the situation is in a compelling and interesting way to grab them and involve them in the study. Explain in the second paragraph, if not sooner or a little bit later, the importance of this research to research in general. Why is this idea important? And by the way, I'll share this with you if you're interested, if you want to have this presentation. So you can or cannot take notes as you prefer. But you've got to explain the importance of your research. If you can't justify why this research is important, guess what? It's not. So you better be able to convince your reader that it's important. Third, you need to tell the purpose of this study very distinctly. I often, when I write, will say, the purpose of this study is 1, 2, 3. So there's no doubt in anybody's mind why the study is important and what the purpose of the research is. And let me say, it's extremely important when you're writing that you be well organized. And that's a very difficult task, to stay organized. And one trick I use is that 1, 2, 3. And I'll often do it in my initial draft of studies. What's the purpose? 1, 2, 3. What's the contribution to the literature? 1, 2, 3. And then I take it out. Sometimes if it's complex, I'll leave it in. But sometimes I'll take it out, but it helps me organize my thoughts. Because if my thoughts aren't organized, the reader is not going to follow it either. So organization is very key when you're writing. Get the attention, describe the purpose, explain the importance, and define the purpose. And then another thing that you've got to do is tell how this research is contributing to the body of knowledge. Again, if you can't explain how this research is important to what we already know, or contributing to managers and to academics, then maybe it's not important. So you better justify and explain to your reviewers why this paper is important to the whole body of knowledge in the discipline. And let me give you an example. We recently had an article accepted for publication. It's now published within a matter of about 2 weeks in a top tourism journalist, Tourism Management. It's an A-star elite tourism management journal. Now, where we got the idea was I'm the director of the Business and Tourism Research Center, and in the Valley, how many of you are familiar with this area in general? Some of you? Okay. And you're not?
I'm familiar with like the Brownsville area.
Oh, okay,
Not so
well,
much-
Valley.
Not so much like the upper. Some
That-
of the other-
But you know about what happened in summer 2014. We had a dramatic surge in undocumented immigrants. And most of them were women and children, and they were trying to escape deplorable conditions and violence in Central America, most of them. And so they came to the U.S. searching for a better life and safety and security. And many of them, up to 35,000 per month, were coming through the Rio Grande Valley. And the state, as a response, now, first of all, do those immigrants affect tourism? Second, the state responded by surging troops, security forces into the valley. They deployed 1,000 security forces into the valley to secure the border. They were not to intercede with the immigrants, but they were to secure the border. Now, we have a large tourism population here. We do have Mexican nationals, many who come here and contribute over $1 billion to the economy, no doubt. But we also have a group called Winter Texans. These are people who spend their winters here. They come here from as far away as California, and they'll stay here as long as 6 months. And so they contribute about $700 million or more at direct spending in the valley each year. And so that's an important tourism component. And so when we had these surges of the undocumented immigrants and the security forces, the local officials became quite concerned that, especially about the forces, and was this going to portray the Rio Grande Valley as a militarized zone? And everybody was concerned about that, what was going to happen, what was the effect going to be on tourists. Well, as center director, I got a call from a PR person in the National Guard, and they wanted to know, did I have the economic impact information of the security forces on the valley, because we know they're going to be here and spending. And the answer is no, I didn't. But doesn't that bring up an interesting research question? All these things coming together, the undocumented immigrants, the security forces, and the Winter Texans, and what was the impact going to be? So I put out a call to the Ph.D. students, anybody want to be involved in the study? And several of them responded, and so we got together and we developed this study that has ended up in two publications so far, both in tourism management, both A-star journals, and one that's in a revise and resubmit in another A-star tourism journal. So we'll see. But that's how, this is an interesting issue going on. It is important to destinations who want to keep and build tourism. And the purpose of the study in this case was to add to the body of literature in tourism destination management and crisis management. And then those are the things that contribute to the literature, specifically about undocumented immigrants and security force surge on destination tourism. And is this a relevant topic to anywhere in the world other than the Rio Grande Valley?
It is.
Where?
Sure.
Absolutely. They're having a much greater surge. Turkey and Greece, Italy, Germany, all of those countries right now are seeing surges from refugees from other countries. And so they are facing these issues as well. Turkey has responded to the tourism issue, because they have a vast tourism industry, by putting these refugees in camps that are away from the tourism sites. So, but there's been almost no research in that area. We did a lit review, we got together, we looked at everything we could find on tourism crisis, undocumented immigrants and tourism, security forces in tourism, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing in the literature. So again, we looked in those different areas. Even what are the effects of added security on police in a community? That's the closest thing that we could find that there had been any research. So we have to draw on those things that are already out there in the literature to kind of come up with what are the factors, the variables that are in play here in this research. You also have to come up with a theoretical basis for your research theory. Why? Why do you believe what you believe? It is not enough to say, well, logically, we think undocumented immigrants are going to affect tourism. It's not enough to say, well, I think. Who are you to think? You know, who's going to believe you? So you have to have a theoretical rationale for the decisions that you make, the relationships of variables that you propose. And you make yourself your job a whole lot easier if you find an existing framework, something that's already been done that you can work with that helps already justify the relationships that you were going to propose. In our case, there was a study in 1998, extremely well cited, many people reference it, by Simpson and Graff, 1998, where they talk about international travel and all of the factors that might influence it. So here's our theoretical framework. They said, and you know I'm not saying I think, they said that external factors such as the media, governmental actions, internal factors such as perceptions of risk, those things are going to affect information search, whether or not you get information about the destination, which will all impact your behavior. Do you go there or not? And that's kind of what we wanted to know is, are all of these factors going to influence Winter Texans' return or not? We found other theories that were very relevant. Okay, we've got undocumented immigrants. Why would that have any impact on tourist decisions? Well, there's a theory called integrated threat theory that says when you have in-groups and out-groups, in-groups are people who live here, for example, could be the U.S., could be people in the Rio Grande Valley, but it's in-group versus out-group. When you have out-groups that come in contact with the in-groups feel threatened. And there are various types of threat. But that theory that's been developed and studied for years, began with Stephen, 1996, has looked a lot at threat theory. And it's been used in a lot of contexts. Never in travel and tourism. And there has also been no research on outcome. They've looked a lot at, okay, so we have this threat, we may feel threatened by out-group members. So it affects our emotions. And that's where the research has gone so far. And what we said is, okay, it's going to also affect behavior. So threat affects emotions and beliefs and thoughts, which affect behavior. There's also signaling theory. What do security forces, if you walk into Progresso or if you walk down the street and you see police standing there, what does that signal to you?
Security.
So you feel safer? No.
You feel threatened?
You feel threatened? Okay, you feel safer, you feel threatened, which is it?
Threatened.
No, I said insecurity.
Oh, insecurity.
Yeah.
Does anybody feel safer when you see the police? Actually, some research says yes. You know, that when you have police in the neighborhood and they're highly visible, that is a securing, a reassuring factor. And we had, the other paper we had published was called Reassurance or Cause for Concern. And so we more focused on signaling theory as security forces. Because we didn't know when we talked among the PhD students when we were developing the project, does this make us feel better or worse? Is it saying there's a problem that we didn't know was here? Or should we feel safer? So those were questions that our research was designed to address. And then integrated information theory also says that we, Anderson 81, that we take our decisions, we take all the information that's available that we're exposed to and go find information and look at all the information combined to make decisions. So those were the theoretical basis for this particular paper. Then you need to come up, I work in models. I don't think I can operate without drawing pictures. So when we're coming up with our ideas and our study and how we're going to do it, I always draw circles and lines. And this is what we came up with in one of the models that we decided to test. And there were actually 3 from the data set that we got. But here we said, okay, and many of these are logical, and I think, but we also have the theories that I already went over and empirical support to justify them. So you come up with all the variables, or what we call constructs, that you're going to use in your model, and you draw relationships. We believe that news, why does this keep doing this? The news about the security force, and this news was all over the media, right? In the US anyway. The news about the security forces was going to affect word of mouth about the security forces, and we know word of mouth is the best communication tool there is. And we get the Winter Texans talking. That would affect their perceived security from the security forces. Do we believe the security forces will protect us or not? Which is also affected by the attitude toward undocumented immigrants. And that affects perceived safety. Now, there has been a lot of research in tourism about perceived risk and safety. So we were able to draw on that literature as well to show that this is a very important construct. Then we said that's going to affect recommendation likelihood. Will the Winter Texans recommend the site to others? That's a well-used, well-recognized, and highly used construct in marketing. Will people recommend your business to others? And would they return? That's another highly used, often used outcome variable in marketing. We also had reviewers in the first review of the paper say, you know, you need to look at political orientation and you need to look at property ownership, control for it. So we added those to the model after we had actually done it. We did have the variables, so we threw them in. I thought the political orientation effects on undocumented immigrants was pretty much an obvious thing, but surprisingly enough, there have only been 1 or 2 studies that have looked at political orientation in tourism. So it did add to the contribution of the study a bit. Okay, in the same section, remember we're still just only in the second section of the paper, Literature Review and Theoretical Foundation. You have to explain each one of your constructs and the paths that you're proposing. So, you know, if I go back, I have to go to word of mouth, explain what it is, tell where I think it's going to lead to, and then give theoretical and empirical support. Let me make sure I get this right. For each of the constructs and path that you have to do that. And then you have to state your testable hypotheses. In this paper, for example, believe it or not, nobody had defined perceived safety. And reviewers were hitting us hard because we were going about it in an odd way because nobody had defined it. And then in 2016, Lou, Pennington Gray, and Krager came out with the definition. And so the first statement is based on Lou et al. Perceived safety is defined as normally interpreted as a general measure that reflects people's feelings and indicate the level of people's confidence to overcome uncertainty. Then we go on to say that theoretical support comes from Somets and Graf, 1998, who said that there should be that relationship. And then we talk about empirical support, other studies that have done this, Yüksel and Yüksel, Hong and Tsai, Gibson and Graff. There are a number of studies that have looked somewhat at perceived safety or its inverse perceived risk on tourism outcomes. So we had that literature. So you see how we define the term, we stated the relationship, we believe perceived safety is going to affect recommendation likelihood and return intention. Provided theoretical support, found similar studies. Sometimes you have to go outside of marketing to find support, but you can almost always find support, empirical support, studies that have already been done to help you believe what you believe in the theoretical support. Have any questions so far?
About the process or about your study? I actually had a question about the study.
Okay, what's your question?
Okay. When you asked that question about security and security forces and feeling of insecurity and everything, did you actually look at it from the perspective, I don't know if you'll get to that, but did you look at it from the perspective of the Mexican tourists coming over, or did you look at it from mostly Caucasian, I'm guessing the Caucasian winter Texans?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there are two different points of view.
Right.
The Caucasian people will be affluent and everything, so if they see more police, they might feel safer. But the people coming from Mexico, who tend to distrust the security forces,
Yeah.
won't feel safe when they see more police.
Actually, in the early stages, there was a Ph.D. student from Mexico that was in our little committee. He ended up having to drop out because of other time obligations, but we did talk about whether or not we could survey the Mexican national tourists. And we decided not to, simply because we didn't have a good, easy way of getting to them and surveying them. But that would have added a different dimension that would have been very interesting, absolutely. One of the reasons we do survey Winter Texans is I've been doing Winter Texan surveys for many years now, since 2004. And every time I do a survey, every 2 years, I ask them, are you willing to serve on a panel in Winter Texans to answer questions or participate in research? So I had this panel that I could email and direct them to an online survey, which is what I did.
Okay, so it's mostly,
Convenience,
okay.
yeah. But think about, okay, so if we were going to do survey Mexican nationals, how could we access them?
Mercedes for the shops.
To go to the, yeah,
Exactly,
the outlets,
exactly.
yeah. The outlets would be a good way, and the malls.
Because that might give a more balanced view.
Well, that would give that group, yes, absolutely.
Wasn't the phrase Winter Texans in the title?
No.
No.
I try not to use the term for 2 reasons. One, I don't want them to know who I am, because your research is supposed to be blind review. And, they could find out, no question, because we do cite the study when we justify the research about this is a lot of people. There are 53,000 households that are Winter Texans, so that's a big community. But the other reason is because I'm trying to help expand theory. So I don't want it focused on Winter Texans only. I want to try to be broader. I want to show how this research extends to Europe or to anywhere. The context, yes, it is seasonal migrants is what I typically use. They're migrants who migrate back and forth. And there are a number of migrant populations across the world that do that. People from Sweden routinely go to Spain in the winter, or Europe, go to Spain. And so there are a lot of in Australia that go all over the country. So they're even in China. They're everywhere. So I want to show how my research applies, at least theoretically, to all these different contexts. Otherwise, you're talking about very applied research into a specific case. So think broader. Think theory, and how can you affect theory? Then you have to talk about the method, or if you're developing your study, you have to think about the method. You have to think about your sample selection. Who are we gonna survey? How many are we gonna survey, just like you brought up? We're gonna do just winter Texans, we're gonna do, actually in this study, we did winter Texans through the panel, but then we also, I was on the radio, had news stories in the media, and we got residents to participate. I forgot the number, about 325 residents or so. And that's our third paper that's on Revise and Resubmit right now. I just got this week. And I gotta say, I've had the best review on that paper. It wasn't just a revise and resubmit. It may not, an accept, and it may not be accepted. But one of the reviewers said, "Thank you for this inspiring research." And so that's a word you don't hear very much by reviewers. So anyway, you gotta think about the sample selection, who it is. You gotta think about the sample that you're using. Are the results gonna be generalizable to the population in general, or which population? So ideally, we want a random sample of the people who this will apply to. Typically, we use students, we use whatever's convenient, but then that jeopardizes the generalizability. And let me say, I know I have this somewhere else in here, all studies have flaws, all studies. And generalizability is very often one of them. What you have to do is recognize the flaws, try to account for them, and then tell it in your limitations. And then throughout. You know, you need to be sure that you recognize it and that your reader knows that this is a limitation of the study. Our limitation was selected people who were on, winter Texans who were online, you know, part of the panel. So are the results generalizable to Europe? Probably not, maybe, who knows? But you just have to recognize the flaws and explain them. You also have to figure out how you're going to measure the variables that you come up with, the constructs. There are about a zillion, last I counted, scales out there. These are ways of measuring different things that people in the past, researchers in the past have used. You're better off, you make your life easier, let me put it that way, if you use these scales that have already been used. You can make a contribution to the literature if you have something brand new, but then you have to go through these scale purification and testing measures that you don't necessarily have to do quite so stringently if you use somebody else's work for the scales. As an example, perceived safety that we use, came from a standard measure in the criminology literature that just asked, how safe do you feel? How safe do you feel walking around at night? How safe do you feel walking around at day? We had a couple others, you feel safe in the RGB. But that's where that measure came from. Try to see if you find other scales that people have used. Then you also have to think about analytical method that you're going to use, because that might also determine your sample selection. If you're going to use simple, I don't know, t-test, maybe 30 or 40 interviews is enough. If you're going to use any kind of statistical methodology, especially like structural path analysis, structural equation modeling, or in this case we used PLS. I'm not going to get into a lot of that, but you may need to have 200 or even more. And a lot of reviewers, I had a structural equation modeling paper that a reviewer said, I had like 700 respondents, and he said I needed 10,000 respondents. Yeah. So you want to consider, I know, you want to consider, you want to have a good sample that's going to be representative of your population, and that your statistical method will be appropriate for your statistical method. Then, of course, the results, you simply explain what you found. You do your analysis, and here's what we find. You'll use tables to show your statistics. More and more want to see everything from means, skewness, kurtosis to, of course, if you're doing like path analysis or something like we did, the statistics for that as well. And your test of hypotheses. So you developed hypotheses in the lit review section and the hypotheses development section, and now you do the actual test, and your tables will give the actual numbers of results. And then the final sections, conclusion and discussion. The way I do it, I always summarize the findings, relating it back to the purpose, and go back to that first section. I said I was going to do 1, 2, 3, contribute to the literature, 1, 2, 3. Now I'm going to say how I did. These findings actually summarize this purpose. Here's what we found. Here's the contribution I made to the body of knowledge and to how they extend theory. And then also put it into context of the research that's gone on before. Don't just say, here's what I found, but here's what I found, which is contrary to what so-and-so found or supports. You need to relate what you found back to your lit review and to other findings. And again, then you want to put the implications to the literature and the implications to managers. I think that I have that on the next slide. Implications, explain what the results mean to managers and academics. Then you always have a little section on future research. Explain what new research questions arose when you were doing this study. And I said earlier that all studies have flaws. If you do survey research like I do generally, you will find that you never get it right. No matter how many times you go over it and over and over it, you administer, it comes back, and you're going to say, I wish I had included this. There's going to be something you forget. So here's perfect opportunity to put in those things that you forgot that would be really interesting questions. And you detail your limitations. All research has flaws. Be sure and just be upfront with them. But this also creates opportunities for future research. We only use this sample, which suggests future research should use a different sample. And then now, I can tell you tourism management has started requesting the whole questionnaire as an appendix. And matter of fact, I'm on the fence about this. This is the first time I had seen it, where they requested the whole questionnaire. Often, most of the time, they do want the scales, what measures you use for each construct. But this time, they wanted the actual questionnaire. And that's where one reviewer picked up that we had that political orientation and requested that we put it into this study. So you may have an appendix. Often the scales will go in the appendix or questionnaire. Sometimes it's an actual study. It's your choice. Okay, so here's an example. Here's a question somebody posed to me quite a while ago. I want you to think about this for a minute. Now, we're not going to do the lit review, but we're going to think about it. In restaurants with self-help drinks, like McDonald's, they give you your cup, go get your own drink, right? Why do dine-in consumers order the more expensive large or extra large drink?
I think it's the same price, and you get to refill for free, I think.
Yeah, well, why not get a small? If the small is 89 cents, and the large is $1.25, and the extra large $1.50, do you see people buying the $1.50?
Doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make sense. The price
They
is
always-
different.
They always do buy the biggest ones,
Really?
Yeah.
even at the movies. It's
Yeah.
like,
Doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make sense.
Maybe if you were going through the drive-through, it makes sense then. But if you
Like,
if you
it
refill,
makes
what would
sense,
you
but
buy?
you always see people buying I do it.
You got the large, right?
I mean,
Why?
every time you go to Whataburger, it's like, oh, okay.
I want a large.
Yeah, but it's not,
Doesn't make
I mean,
sense.
I know it doesn't make sense, but you don't think about it. It's just like, oh, let me get the. I know it's like, it's not logical but
So why do we do it? So that,
Maybe you don't want it to end or finish
But the refill is right there.
The refill, but they don't want to be, maybe they're lazy to go for refill, so like.
I like it because, like, right before you leave, you go get a refill in the machine with you.
Mhm.
So then I have a large drink.
And
Then you can
you
go there.
perceive that you get more.
They help the economy. They help McDonald's. Get more money, more profit.
By the time I refill 4 times with small, there's no reason for me to take
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense, actually,
Okay, so is this an important topic? What,
for sales.
for sales?
Consumer behavior.
It's about consumer behavior? And it would be important with all, for McDonald's and Whataburger, what if everybody finally realized and started buying the small? So it does have implications, it could be an important topic. How did the study contribute to the literature on consumer behavior and pricing? Well, we don't really know unless we delved into that literature. So if you decided you wanted to research this question, and I haven't, by the way, it's just I think it's a very interesting question. Then you would go into the literature, see what's been done. And you would consider theories that might explain the behavior. So we would think rational choice theory. Consumers are rational thinking human beings, and they will go in and every time they'll say, I want the small. What else? What other theories are out there that might explain it? Inertia? Well, I just always do it, get the big. How about elaboration likelihood model that you'll, I'm sure, learn, ELM, where there are different paths that people take, usually depending on how involved they are, how important that topic is, or that product or service is to them. And so if it's not a very high importance, like buying a drink might not be, then we take a peripheral route, which means we really don't even think about it, like you said. I don't think about it. If it's a more important topic, like I'm gonna go buy a car, then you're gonna do a lot of research. So maybe that's the theory. So, you know, you think about the theories. In your readings, you will try to come up with theories that would explain it. Then you identify factors that might explain the decision. And y'all just talked about some of them, right? What'd you say? Why might people get the soft drink?
Sometimes it might be a suggestion from the person that's selling to you. Because sometimes they'll say large, medium, or small. So you just pick up
I
on the
think
first
you
thing
just
they
don't
say.
think about it, yes or whatever, I just wanna go eat.
Exactly, so it's
I
the
don't
very
care,
first thing they
it's
say.
80 cents less.
And the perceived value. So here are some things I just jotted down. Personality factors, I don't know. Perceived value, I just perceive that the value is greater if I get the big. Amount of effort of thought, that's what, I don't want to think about it. Concern about other customers, about employees who suggest it maybe. Income level, you know, maybe I order the small because I'm on a budget. Type of meal order, you know, does it come with a meal? So there are going to be a lot of factors that might explain which size drink. So then the next step is to model those factors and identify scale measures. And I just threw in a couple so you can see, I think in models, so I drew pictures of randomly selected options. Then you determine the methodology and the sample that you're going to use for your study. So think about this study we're talking about. Do you want to do survey, observation, or experiment? That's pretty much, you can categorize any kind of study into one of those 3 areas. How would you do a survey?
Questionnaire or interview assessment.
Or online.
I mean,
Online? How would you find out online?
Well, it depends. If you have, like, if you're an online company, you can send to existing customers.
Okay. And you ask them questions about, did you get a small, did you get a large?
Exactly. What were your meal choices, things like
Yeah, and why did you choose that? Let me say about survey research in general, people don't always answer, honestly. You'll learn a lot of these things. They don't, and even with the return intention that we used in our security study, Our intention isn't always what the actual is, but it's often used as a proxy. So just to keep that in mind. And survey research, I may not remember. So I could also, go into stores and I could intercept them. Would you take this survey?
That's what Walmart.
And you put on there, got the small, got the large, or something like that.
But the fast food place, what they do is they give you a receipt and there's like an online address you can go to and fill out the survey and
Yes,
you get 2 free tacos.
good incentive. So surveys, just questionnaires is certainly one way of doing it. Can you think of a way that observation might be a way of addressing this study issue? Am I on time? How would you do it? Observation?
You just sit at the table and
Just hold
see
it
how
out.
Just
how
watch.
many people.
Yeah. One of my favorite studies was Milliman 92, who looked at music effects. And he actually is a blind man who, interestingly enough, would do a study based on sound. I guess it was more relevant to him than the rest of us in general, but he wondered, did the pace of music increase sales? And so he looked at different stores and would vary the pace of the tempo of the music in the different stores. And they observed people as they went down the aisle and timed them. Do they go faster? Do they go slower with the pace? And then ultimately, yes, they go faster, which, increases or decreases sales?
Decreases.
Decreases sales. Because the faster you go, the less time you have to watch and buy all those things you didn't really want. So observation can be an important methodology. Experiment, can you set up an experiment in this study? Yeah. You bring students into this room and you do a mock meal, which drink do you want, and you give them a questionnaire, you ask them questions, and so you could conduct a study to see how people do it. So the point of this is there are a lot of different ways of answering the questions that you come up with. And you have to decide your sample, who, when, where, how many, considering both the generalizability of your study results based on your sample and the analytical method that you're going to use. Then you develop your questionnaire, you administer it, you clean the data, and you do the analysis, which that's part of the most fun for me when you hit that little button, do I have results or not after all that work. Okay, so tips. As a marketer, I had to come up with learning from slogans. So here we go. Here's some tips that I think are important for beginning PhD students or anybody who's doing research. Learn from Seagate. Seagate slogan, we turn on ideas. So come up with ideas. Be what my husband calls nosy, but my mother called intellectually curious. Mothers being more generous than spouses. Read, read, read. Look at the future research section of papers if you have trouble coming up with ideas. But the longer you're in this business, the easier you can come up with ideas. I mean, they're around us every day, just like the drink. Which size do we get? And observe, watch people, see what they do, and ask, why do they do that? Always ask why. Why? Just like is it 2-year-olds where they say why all the time? This gives you your reasons and your antecedents of that model, the path model. Ask how. How do they do it? How is this getting done? And then what happens? What are the effects? And that's your outcomes in your path models. And who does it? Who's it important to? Who's it relate to? Think like Nike. Just do it. You just got to be fearless and you've got to do it. I've got to say, there are a lot of academics who come up with great ideas and they maybe start with a paper and then they always say, I just don't think it's good enough. But you just have to be fearless and you have to get out and you have to do it. You're going to get rejections, no question. We've all had it. The worst one I heard, I had a colleague who got a paper that said got a paper back rejected that says, "It's a shame a tree had to die for this trash." Generally in marketing, I've got to say the reviewers are almost always very generous. They're very nice in their reviews. They may reject it, but they are not hurtful like that one. Don't feel failure. Don't let fear of failure stand in your way. Commit to the idea. And talk it around. What do you think of this idea? And I've had colleagues who don't share those ideas because they're afraid they're going to get it stolen. So I will get that out there. But if you talk around, people may help you to think through things through a little better. Be creative. This is the reason I love marketing. It's the creative side of the business. You get to have fun with thinking outside the bun. Think outside, imagination, never follow. You're going to get published in the best journals if you can be creative. And you can be creative in 3 areas. Have a really great idea, have a really great methodology, or have an innovative theory that's not been used in marketing before. Now, I was hoping signaling theory in our tourism paper was something new that had not been used in marketing before. Came from the criminology area. Oh, I heard a big buzz. And one of my favorite studies, another one, was an innovative idea and methodology. Somebody asked an everyday question, it was in journal marketing, do we use less soap, hair shampoo, when the bottle has less in it? What a simple question, right? How do you determine that? How do you measure that? Well, they gave people a survey that had a hand drawn in it and said, draw a circle for the amount that you would use with an almost empty shampoo bottle. So they were a little creative in the way they measured it. So be innovative, think outside the bun, think different like Apple, and just be creative in the way you execute your study. Focus. Part of the hardest thing, there are 2 things that are really hard in my opinion, and one is to keep focused. And this is for students too that I've seen. Focus on your question. Write your research question down, or your title. I like to write the title down and tape it to your computer monitor. And everything you do in that paper should be focused on that question. Don't get too sidetracked. You're focusing on this one thing. Read. Focus, focus, focus. When you read, it's going to lead to the justifications that you need to focus on. The other thing, the second thing that's the hardest thing to do is about making decisions. So you're like a juggler. There are so many different options out there. Which variables are you going to use? And within the variables, which measures are you going to use? What's methodology? Which questions am I going to ask? There are thousands of possibilities, like Best Buy. Your readings will give you the justification. Everything you do, almost everything you do, should be justified on past research. You should generally say often, based on the theory of, based on the scale by, based on empirical research from. So you justify your decisions, not in your mind, but you do it through prior readings. So it's about making those decisions, and the smart decisions, justifying them. It's like, going into a board meeting and just saying, well, I think we ought to have this new product. The answer is no. Why do you think that? You better come with all your facts and figures lined up. Well, this is the same thing. Why did you decide to use this variable? Well, because all this research before says, and this theory says. Remember, after you do your study, there are no redos. So try your best, read, get it right before you administer your study. Papers must be well written. No ifs, ands, or buts. And I've got to tell you, as a reviewer, if you get a paper and it is not well written, it pisses you off. I've sent back to the reviewers that this should have been desk projected. You can't understand it, what they're saying. You must have it well written. I'm sure that's my time. Proof, right. I've been writing a long time now. A long time. And I bet you, I can spend 2 or 3 days on one paragraph. And I bet you I proofread an article before I submit 50 times. So don't think as a student, I'm going to be blunt, don't think as a student you can write it, proofread it once, it's going to be good. Proof it. Lose your ego. You know, I've had colleagues and people I've worked with that get upset if you move a comma, but in this business you need to welcome criticism. It should be constructive, and it should all be aimed toward making the product better, and that's the orientation you need to have. I want to make my work the best it can be, and so these people are trying to help me do that. Be like Pizza Hut, make it great, set high standards, aim high, you can always trade down. Don't submit, you have to critically review your own work and say, is this worthy of journal marketing? But aim for journal marketing. Everything you write, think, I'm going to get it in journal marketing. And then if it ends up and you look at it critically, say, well, maybe not journal marketing, maybe JAMS or JBR. Okay, so aim high. Don't sell yourself short. But Dr. Kroll was right. There's no substitute for working hard. And you're not going to get journal marketing working 19 hours a week. You make that decision about what you want to do and where you want to be when you grow up. And if you want to be a top researcher, you work hard. Industry, you work 8 to 5. Well, you might want to work 6 days a week or 7 days a week. Don't think this business. If you want to be a good researcher or an excellent researcher, it's not about short hours. It's about long, hard work. Be like Avis. And be like the Army. Be all you can be. And remember, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Any questions? We've gone a little over. So